The Iridians choked on their shame as human soldiers, gutted their former alien oppressors with ultra-tech weaponry forged by human hands. Kyle Brown's powered armor crushed the skull of the Iridian guard he had just impaled on his pulse blade. The reptilian's death scream echoed through the war-torn streets. 50 years ago, the Iridians had reluctantly allowed humanity to join the Galactic Union, viewing them as mere cave-dwelling primitives. But in 5 short decades, human ingenuity and relentless drive had eclipsed Iridian technology. Humans reverse-engineered and improved upon everything the aliens had: faster-than-light drives, energy weapons, powered armor, genetic augmentations, cybernetic implants. With each human advancement, Iridian shame and resentment grew. Tensions reached a breaking point. The Iridians expelled humanity from the Galactic Union and launched a surprise attack on human colonies, slaughtering millions. But they had underestimated their former primitives. Now, after 5 years of brutal warfare, human fleets were ravaging Iridian worlds. Iridian cities burned, and elite human soldiers hunted the Iridian leadership to the ground. Kyle Brown was one of those elite soldiers, a veteran of a dozen bloody campaigns. His mission: capture the Iridian High Counselor Hydrus, the alien leader who had exiled and betrayed humanity. Intel placed Hydrus in a bunker beneath these ruins. As Kyle and his squad picked their way through the rubble, a barrage of energy beams sizzled the air. Iridian guards poured from cover, spraying the human soldiers with automatic plasma rifles and photon grenades. Alex went down, his armor sparking and smoking. Mike and David returned fire, liquefying alien bodies with gluon projection cannons. Kyle charged into the nearest group of Iridians, pulse blade humming. He decapitated 2 with a single slash, then ran a third through with the crackling energy blade. Reptilian organs splattered the cracked concrete. Humanity's vengeance would not stop until Hydrus was in chains or in the ground. If Kyle and his team failed in their mission, the Iridians would rally behind their leader, extending this terrible war for months or years to come. Millions more humans and Iridians would die. Kyle refused to let that happen. Not when victory was so close. He would sacrifice his own life to end this war today, to make the aliens regret ever crossing paths with humans, to make the Iridians quake in fear at how their primitive inferiors had evolved into vengeful demigods. More Iridian guards poured out of the bunker, their plasma rifles spitting deadly bolts. Alex's armor took multiple hits, the impacts knocking him off his feet. He hit the ground hard and didn't get back up, his armor charred and sparking. "Man down! Alex is hit!" Mike shouted over the comms. He and David laid down suppressing fire, their gluon cannons ripping through Iridian flesh and armor. Kyle roared in fury, charging the remaining guards. His pulse blade sliced through them like a laser through paper, leaving twitching reptilian bodies in his wake. But as he turned back to his squad, his heart sank. John was propped up against a chunk of rubble, his armor shattered. Dark red blood seeped from a gash in his side. Mike was already attending to him, applying pressure and injecting coagulants. "How bad?" Kyle asked, kneeling beside them. Mike shook his head. "He's stable for now, but he won't be fighting anytime soon." Kyle gritted his teeth. They were down 2 men, but they couldn't stop now. Not when they were so close to Hydrus. He turned to David. "Breach charges on the bunker door. Let's finish this." David nodded, pulling the explosives from his pack. They planted the charges and took cover. The explosion shook the ground, blasting the reinforced door off its hinges. Kyle and David charged inside, weapons ready. The bunker was a maze of dimly lit corridors, but they had the schematics. They navigated the twists and turns, checking each room for signs of Hydrus. Suddenly a group of Iridians stepped out into the corridor, hands raised. They weren't guards, they wore the white coats of scientists. "Don't shoot, we surrender," one of them called out. He was older, with grey scales and a distinctive scar across his snout. "I am Dr. Zahn, Chief Science Officer to Counselor Hydrus." Kyle kept his pulse blade leveled at the doctor's chest. "Where's Hydrus?" Dr. Zahn shook his head. "Gone. But that's not important now. You must listen to me." We have discovered something. An ancient artifact of immense power. Hydrus plans to use it to crush your resistance once and for all. The doctor explained that the artifact was hidden on a remote planet called Nexus. If Hydrus obtained it, he would become a god, unstoppable. I can help you find it before he does, Dr. Zahn said. But we must hurry. Hydrus has already dispatched his assassin, Kravus, to secure the artifact. Kyle's mind raced. This changed everything. He contacted his superiors, requesting immediate extraction. They had to get to Nexus before Hydrus did. As the dropship descended into the ruins, Kyle and his remaining squadmates loaded the wounded John aboard. Dr. Zahn joined them, the key to stopping Hydrus's ascension to godhood. The dropship lifted off, engines roaring. Next stop, Nexus. The race was on to claim the ultimate power in the universe. The dropship shuddered as it exited FTL, emerging into a maelstrom of destruction above Nexus. Human and Iridian warships traded volleys of particle beams and antimatter missiles, filling the void with silent explosions. Fighters swarmed like angry hornets, dancing a lethal ballet amidst the drifting hulks of gutted capital ships. "Shit! Evasive maneuvers!" Kyle shouted, wrenching the controls. The dropship jinked and juked, narrowly avoiding the flaming wreckage of a human frigate. A dense asteroid field surrounded Nexus, providing cover for the warring fleets. Kyle gritted his teeth, pushing the engines to their limit as he weaved through the tumbling rocks. Proximity alarms blared as Iridian fighters closed in, peppering their shields with plasma bolts. David manned the rear turret, returning fire with the dropship's pulse cannons. "I can't shake them. We're taking hits." Dr. Zahn gripped his restraints, eyes wide with fear. "We must reach the surface. The artifact is our only hope." With a final burst of speed, Kyle threaded the needle between two colliding asteroids, the pursuing fighters smashing themselves to atoms against the unyielding stone. The dropship plunged into Nexus's atmosphere, hull glowing red-hot from the friction. They landed hard in a clearing amidst the overgrown ruins of an ancient alien city. Bizarre multicolored flora choked the crumbling structures, and strange animal calls echoed through the humid air. "Move out, but stay sharp," Kyle ordered, checking his pulse rifle. "God knows what's waiting for us out there." Dr. Zahn consulted a handheld scanner as they trekked into the jungle. "The artifact's energy signature is coming from the center of the ruins, about 2 clicks north." The team pushed through the dense undergrowth, hacking at the foliage with machetes. Carnivorous plants snapped at their heels, dripping acidic sap. Swarms of venomous insects buzzed angrily around their heads, kept at bay only by the low-level energy fields generated by their armor. Suddenly a chilling howl cut through the jungle, followed by an answering chorus. "Shit, predators!" Mike hissed, scanning the trees with his rifle. A pack of feathered reptiles, each the size of a tiger, burst from the brush, razor-sharp talons flashing. The team opened fire, pulse rounds stitching the creatures' hides, but the beasts were fast and resilient, leaping and dodging with unnatural agility. One of the reptiles pounced on David, bearing him to the ground. He screamed as its jaws clamped around his arm, crunching through armor and bone. Kyle blasted the creature point-blank with his rifle, splattering its brains across the loam. "You okay?" he asked, helping David to his feet. "I'll live," David grunted, cradling his mangled arm, "but I won't be much use in a fight." They pressed on, leaving the reptiles' carcasses for the scavengers. As they neared the center of the ruins, the energy readings from Dr. Zahn's scanner spiked. "We're close," the scientist said, excitement coloring his voice. "The artifact should be just ahead in that temple complex." But as they approached the vine-choked stones, a hail of plasma bolts sizzled from the shadows. Iridian commandos, led by the notorious assassin Kravus, had beaten them to the prize. Kyle and his team dove for cover, returning fire. The jungle erupted into a fierce guerrilla battle, with both sides using the crumbling walls and dense foliage to their advantage. Pulse rounds and plasma bolts crisscrossed the clearing, felling trees and shattering ancient masonry. In the chaos of the firefight, Mike suddenly turned his weapon on Kyle, a cruel smile twisting his lips. "Sorry, buddy, but Hydrus made me an offer I couldn't refuse." Before Kyle could react, Mike snatched the scanner from Dr. Zahn and sprinted towards the temple, leaving his former comrades to the mercies of Kravis and his soldiers. Kyle roared in fury, emptying his rifle's power cell at Mike's retreating back. But the traitor was too quick, disappearing into the temple's shadowed entrance. "That bastard," David snarled, struggling to aim his rifle one-handed. "We trusted him." Kyle's mind raced, analyzing the tactical situation. They were outnumbered and outflanked with Kravis's commandos closing in, but he refused to let Mike's betrayal be the end of them. "David, Dr. Zahn, fall back to those rocks and lay down suppressing fire," he ordered, pointing to a jumble of boulders at the edge of the clearing. "I'm going after Mike." "But you'll be killed," Dr. Zahn protested. "If Mike bonds with that artifact, we're all dead anyway," Kyle retorted. "Now go." As David and Dr. Zahn laid down a blistering barrage of pulse fire, Kyle sprinted for the temple entrance, zigzagging to avoid the plasma bolt sizzling past his head. He dove through the doorway, rolling to his feet in a low crouch. The temple's interior was a labyrinth of narrow corridors and crumbling chambers, choked with vines and fallen masonry. Kyle moved cautiously, using his armor's enhanced senses to navigate the gloom. Suddenly, a plasma bolt seared past his helmet, missing by inches. Kravis stepped from the shadows, mandibles twisted in a predatory grin. "Foolish human," the assassin hissed. "You cannot hope to defeat me. I have been enhanced with the finest Iridian cybernetics and genetic augmentations." Kyle didn't waste breath on a reply. He charged forward, pulse rifle spitting death. Kravis moved with blinding speed, his own rifle blazing. Plasma bolts and pulse rounds ricocheted off the temple's walls, filling the air with molten stone shrapnel. They clashed in the center of the chamber, rifles forgotten as they traded blows with armored fists and powered gauntlets. Kyle felt his ribs crack under the assassin's relentless onslaught, but he fought through the pain, landing a solid uppercut that snapped Kravis's head back. The Iridian staggered, momentarily stunned. Kyle pressed his advantage, slamming his knee into the assassin's gut and following up with a devastating haymaker. Kravis crumpled to the floor, neck twisted at an unnatural angle. Breathing heavily, Kyle staggered deeper into the temple, following the fading energy signals from Mike's stolen scanner. He found his former friend in the heart of the complex, standing before a floating, pulsing orb of blinding white light. "Mike, stop!" Kyle shouted, leveling his rifle. "You don't know what that thing will do to you." Mike turned, eyes blazing with the same unearthly light as the artifact. "Oh, I know exactly what it will do. It will make me a god, just as Hydrus promised." He reached out, grasping the orb with both hands. The light intensified, flowing up his arms and suffusing his entire body. Mike screamed in agony and ecstasy, his form twisting and warping as the artifact's power coursed through him. Kyle fired, pulse rounds punching through Mike's chest, but the traitor barely seemed to notice, laughing madly as his wounds sealed shut in seconds. "You can't stop me, Kyle," Mike gloated, voice echoing with otherworldly resonance. "I am beyond your pathetic human weapons now." He gestured, and an invisible force slammed into Kyle, hurling him across the chamber. Kyle hit the far wall hard, feeling something crack in his chest. He struggled to rise, blood bubbling from his lips. Mike advanced, energy crackling around his clenched fists. Kyle knew he couldn't defeat his former friend in single combat, not with the artifact's power surging through Mike's veins. But there was one thing he could do. Gritting his teeth against the pain, Kyle raised his rifle and fired at the temple's cracked and crumbling ceiling. The ancient stones shattered under the barrage, raining down on Mike in tons of rubble. Mike screamed, raising his hands to blast the falling debris with bolts of searing light. But even his newfound power couldn't hold back the entire temple as it collapsed on top of him, burying the traitorous soldier under a mountain of stone. Kyle staggered from the chamber, clutching his broken ribs. He found David and Dr. Zahn outside, standing amidst a sea of Iridian corpses. Kravis? Kyle asked. Dead, David replied grimly, along with the rest of his squad, but what about Mike? Buried, Kyle said shortly. Along with the artifact, we need to get out of here before the whole place comes down. They limped back to the dropship, battered and bloodied, but alive. As they lifted off, Kyle contacted the human fleet, requesting immediate extraction. Artifact secured, he reported wearily. Hydrus's plan has failed. We're coming home. But even as they broke atmosphere, Kyle felt a strange tingling in his fingertips. He looked down, eyes widening, as tiny arcs of energy crackled across his skin. The artifact's power, it seemed, was not so easily contained. As the dropship shuddered and lurched skyward, Kyle clenched his fists, energy crackling between his fingers. The artifact's power surged through his veins, a seductive whisper in his mind, urging him to unleash his newfound might. He gritted his teeth, struggling to control the dark impulses that clawed at his psyche. David glanced warily at his friend, noting the manic gleam in Kyle's eyes. "Kyle, you okay, man? You're looking a little intense." Kyle's head snapped around, fixing David with a predatory stare. "I'm more than okay," he growled, his voice echoing with an otherworldly resonance. "I can feel the power coursing through me. I could crush entire worlds with a thought." Dr. Zahn, strapped into his seat across from the soldiers, frowned in concern. "The artifact's influence is growing stronger. We must find a way to remove it before—" His words were cut off as Kyle thrust out a hand, invisible forces slamming the scientist back against the bulkhead. "Silence, Iridian filth," Kyle snarled. "I don't need your mewling warnings." David lunged forward, grabbing Kyle's arm. "What the hell are you doing? Let him go!" Kyle's eyes flashed with anger, and he lashed out with a telekinetic blast that sent David crashing into the opposite wall. The dropship rocked violently, alarms blaring as the energy surge fried control systems. Suddenly the comm crackled to life. "Attention, human vessel," a cold, familiar voice hissed. "This is Counselor Hydrus. Surrender the artifact immediately, or be destroyed." Through the viewports, David could see a squadron of sleek Iridian fighters, led by a massive command ship swooping towards them, weapons charged and ready. Kyle let out a bark of cruel laughter. "Hydrus, you fool, you have no idea what you're dealing with." He closed his eyes, concentrating as energy built around him in a blinding nimbus. With a roar of unleashed power, Kyle projected a massive psionic blast that ripped through the void, engulfing the Iridian ships. The fighters crumpled like tin cans, their hulls shredding and spilling debris and bodies into the vacuum. Hydrus's command ship reeled back, its shield shattering under the onslaught. But the backlash from the blast surged through the dropship's systems, overloading the engines and sending the craft spiraling out of control. David and Dr. Zahn clung desperately to their restraints as the ship plummeted back towards Nexus, trailing smoke and flames. They hit the ground hard, skidding and bouncing across the rugged terrain before slamming to a halt against a massive, vine-choked ruin. David blacked out for a moment, his head ringing from the impact. When he came to, he found Dr. Zahn slumped beside him, a jagged cut across his forehead leaking crimson blood. The scientist groaned, stirring weakly as David checked his pulse. But Kyle was nowhere to be seen. A gaping hole torn in the side of the dropship where he had blasted his way out. David staggered to his feet, peering out at the ruined temples glittering in the strange, phosphorescent light of Nexus's fungal forests. "Kyle," he shouted, his voice echoing across the eerie landscape. "Where are you?" A distant figure emerged from the shadows of a toppled obelisk, striding forward with purposeful steps. As it drew closer, David's heart sank. It was Kyle, but not the Kyle he knew. This Kyle radiated an aura of raw, terrifying power, his eyes blazing with mad ambition. "David," Kyle called out, his voice amplified by psionic might. "Don't you see? With this power I can end the war. I can bring both humans and Iridians to heel, united under my rule. Join me, and we can reshape the galaxy as we see fit." David shook his head, a profound sadness weighing on his heart. "This isn't you, Kyle. The artifact is twisting your mind. You've got to fight it. Kyle's face contorted in rage. Fight it? Why would I fight the very thing that has made me a god? No, David. If you're not with me, then you're just another obstacle to be crushed. He raised a hand, fingers curling into a claw as he gathered his power. David dove to the side, just as a lance of psionic energy blasted the dropship, reducing it to molten slag. Dr. Zahn screamed, throwing himself clear of the destruction. David rolled to his feet, drawing his sidearm. The weapon felt pitiful, useless against Kyle's godlike might, but he had to try. He had to find a way to save his friend, or stop him. Don't make me do this, Kyle, David pleaded, aiming the gun with shaking hands. Please, you've got to listen to reason. Kyle laughed, a cold, cruel sound that echoed across the ruins. Reason? Reason is for the weak, for those too afraid to seize true power. I am beyond reason now, David, beyond mercy, beyond humanity. With a casual flick of his wrist, Kyle ripped the gun from David's grasp, sending it spinning away into the shadows. David charged forward, desperate to close the distance, to find some way to reach his friend. But Kyle was too strong, too fast. A blast of telekinetic force caught David in the chest, hurling him back against the crumbling stones of an ancient wall. He felt ribs crack, pain lancing through his torso as he struggled to draw breath. Through blurred vision, David saw Dr. Zahn crawling towards the shattered dropship, frantically searching for something among the wreckage. The scientist pulled a battered datapad from the debris, his fingers flying across the cracked screen. Kyle loomed over David, energy crackling around his clenched fists. Foolish, David. So foolish to think you could stand against me. Now you will die, and the galaxy will tremble before its new master. He raised a hand, power building to a blinding crescendo. But before he could unleash the killing blow, Dr. Zahn shouted out, "David, the artifact, its weakness is—" Kyle whirled, eyes blazing with fury. A blast of psionic energy slammed into Dr. Zahn, catapulting him back into the dropship's smoldering remains. The scientist crumpled, his body broken and lifeless. But in that moment of distraction, David surged to his feet, ignoring the agony of his battered body. He launched himself at Kyle, tackling him to the ground. They grappled, rolling across the rubble-strewn earth, David desperately trying to pin Kyle's arms, to stop him from unleashing his powers. Kyle snarled, his face a mask of rage and madness. "You cannot stop me, David. I am a god." "No," David growled through gritted teeth. "You're not a god. You're a man, Kyle, a good man, and I won't let you destroy yourself." He wrenched at Kyle's armor, tearing at the plates that covered the artifact fused to his friend's chest. Kyle howled in pain and fury, blasting David back with a surge of telekinetic might. David hit the ground hard, every nerve screaming in agony. Through the haze of pain he saw Kyle staggering to his feet, one hand clutched to his chest, where the artifact pulsed with sickly light. "The artifact," Kyle gasped, his eyes suddenly wide with horror. "David, I can't control it. It's too strong, too hungry. Please, you have to stop me. You have to end this." David climbed to his feet, tears streaming down his blood-streaked face. "Kyle, no, there has to be another way. We can fix this together." Kyle shook his head, a wretched sob tearing from his throat. "No, David, it's too late for me. The artifact's power, it's consuming me, corrupting me. If you don't destroy it, I'll become a monster, a threat to everything we've fought for." He staggered forward, grasping David's hand and pressing it to the artifact embedded in his chest. "Please, David, do it. End this before I lose myself completely, before I destroy everything I love." David's heart shattered, tears blurring his vision as he felt the artifact's slick, pulsing surface beneath his fingers. "Kyle, I can't—" "You have to," Kyle whispered, his voice raw with desperation. "Please, David, set me free. Let me die as myself, not as this thing I'm becoming." With a ragged cry of anguish, David dug his fingers into the artifact, feeling it throb and writhe beneath his grip. Kyle screamed, his body convulsing as the artifact's power surged and crackled. David wrenched with all his strength, tearing the artifact free in a spray of blood and sizzling energy. Kyle collapsed, his eyes wide and staring as the life drained from his ravaged body. "Thank you," he whispered, a faint smile touching his lips. "Brother." And then he was gone, his body going slack in David's arms. David knelt there, cradling his friend's lifeless form, the shattered remains of the artifact still clutched in his bloodied hand. Sobs racked his body, grief and loss overwhelming him. Around him, the ancient ruins of Nexus loomed, silent and indifferent to the tragedy that had unfolded within their crumbling walls. The war still raged above, humans and Iridians locked in a desperate struggle for survival. But for David, in that moment, none of it mattered. All that mattered was the bitter price of victory, paid in the blood of his dearest friend. A price that in the end had been too high to bear. The rescue dropship shuddered as it descended through the turbulent atmosphere of Nexus, its engines straining against the buffeting winds. David cradled Kyle's lifeless body, his eyes hollow with grief and exhaustion. Dr. Zahn slumped nearby, his face ashen and his hands trembling. As the dropship touched down at the human encampment, a swarm of medics and soldiers rushed out to meet them. They loaded Kyle's body onto a stretcher, their faces grim with the knowledge of what had transpired. David stumbled down the ramp, his legs barely supporting his weight. A medic rushed to his side, scanning him for injuries. "I'm fine," David rasped, waving the man away. Just take care of Kyle." The journey back to Earth was a blur of debriefings, medical exams, and hushed conversations. David learned that the war still raged, the Iridians emboldened by their near victory on Nexus. When they finally reached Earth, David was hailed as a hero, his actions on Nexus celebrated as a turning point in the war. But he felt hollow, the weight of Kyle's sacrifice bearing down on him like a physical burden. He stood on the tarmac, watching as Kyle's flag-draped casket was loaded onto a waiting hearse. A crowd of mourners had gathered, their faces etched with sorrow and respect. David closed his eyes, the memories of their final battle flashing through his mind, the look of desperation on Kyle's face as he begged David to end his life, to destroy the artifact that had corrupted him. A hand clasped David's shoulder, startling him from his thoughts. He turned to see Admiral Hackett, the Supreme Commander of Earth's defenses. "Son, I know this is a difficult time," Hackett said, his voice gruff but sympathetic. "But we need you now more than ever. The Iridians are preparing for a final assault on Earth. We need your expertise, your knowledge of their tactics and technology." David nodded, his jaw clenched with determination. "I understand, sir. I'll do whatever it takes to protect our people." Over the next few weeks, David worked tirelessly with Earth's military leaders, sharing everything he had learned about the Iridians and their capabilities. He helped develop new weapons and defenses, drawing on the knowledge he had gained from Dr. Zahn and the ancient ruins of Nexus. But even as they prepared for the inevitable attack, the Iridians struck without warning. A massive fleet emerged from FTL on the edge of the solar system, their ships bristling with weapons and filled with fanatical soldiers. The orbital defenses around Earth fought bravely, but they were hopelessly outnumbered. The Iridians punched through the lines, their ships descending on the planet like a swarm of locusts. Cities burned as the Iridians bombarded them from orbit, their weaponry carving deep scars into the Earth's surface. Millions died in the first few hours, their screams echoing across the planet. David watched in horror as the reports flooded in, each one more devastating than the last. New York, London, Moscow, Tokyo, all reduced to rubble and ash. But even as despair threatened to overwhelm him, David rallied the remaining human forces. He knew that they could not win a battle of attrition against the Iridians. They needed to strike at the heart of the enemy, to cut off the head of the snake. And so, David led a daring counterattack against the Iridian flagship, a massive dreadnought that housed the alien High Command. If they could take out Hydrus and his top lieutenants, they could throw the Iridian forces into disarray and buy time for Earth to regroup. The human fleet emerged from FTL in the midst of the Iridian armada, their ships battered but unbroken. They charged forward, guns blazing as the Iridians scrambled to respond. David's ship, the Retribution, spearheaded the assault. Its experimental weapons tore through the Iridian shields like paper, carving deep gashes into the enemy hulls. But the Iridians were not so easily defeated. They swarmed around the human ships, pounding them with plasma fire and missile barrages. The Retribution shuddered under the onslaught, its hull breached in a dozen places. David gritted his teeth as another explosion rocked the ship, sending sparks cascading across the bridge. "Status report," he barked, gripping the command chair as the deck bucked beneath him. "Shields are down to 20%, the tactical officer shouted over the din of battle. "We can't take much more of this." David's eyes narrowed as he stared out the viewport at the looming bulk of the Iridian flagship. They were so close, the dreadnought's hull filling the screen. "Ramming speed," he ordered, his voice cold and hard. "We're going to put this ship right down their throats." The crew hesitated for a moment, their faces pale with fear and determination. Then, as one, they leapt into action, diverting all power to the engines and shields. The Retribution surged forward, its prow glowing cherry red as it plunged towards the Iridian flagship. The dreadnought's guns hammered at the human ship, tearing great chunks from its hull. But it was too late. The Retribution slammed into the flagship's side, crumpling its armor like tin foil. The two ships tumbled together, locked in a deadly embrace. David and his crew fought their way through the wreckage, their weapons spitting fire as they clashed with the Iridian defenders. The air was thick with smoke and the stench of burning flesh, the deck slick with blood and hydraulic fluid. And there, in the heart of the flagship, they found Hydrus. The Iridian leader was clad in ornate battle armor, his eyes glinting with madness and hate. "I think you've won, human," he snarled, his voice dripping with contempt. "You think your pathetic species can stand against the might of the Iridian Empire?" David raised his rifle, his finger tightening on the trigger. "We already have," he said, his voice cold and hard. "You just don't know it yet." The two warriors clashed in a blur of blades and bullets, their armor sparking and shattering under the relentless onslaught. They fought with a savage fury, each driven by the knowledge that the fate of their species hung in the balance. In the end, it was David who emerged victorious, his blade finding a chink in Hydrus's armor and plunging deep into the alien's chest. The Iridian leader slumped to the deck, his eyes glazing over as the life drained from his body. But the cost had been high. The Retribution was a shattered ruin, its crew decimated and its systems failing. David and the few survivors limped back to Earth in a battered shuttle, their hearts heavy with the knowledge of what they had lost. And when they arrived, they found a world in ruins. The great cities of Earth lay in rubble, their streets choked with the bodies of the dead. The sky was dark with ash and smoke, the air thick with the stench of decay. But even in the midst of this horror there was hope. The Iridian fleet, leaderless and demoralized, had retreated back to their own space. The war was over, though at a terrible price. In the months and years that followed, the survivors of Earth began the long and painful process of rebuilding. They salvaged what they could from the ruins, using Iridian technology to accelerate their recovery. David, now a hero and a leader, worked tirelessly to unite the scattered remnants of humanity. He forged alliances with other species, seeking to build a new galactic order based on cooperation and mutual respect. But even as they rebuilt, a new threat emerged. Dr. Zahn, studying the energy readings from the artifact's destruction, discovered a terrifying truth. The artifact's destruction had released a pulse of energy that swept across the galaxy, triggering a long-dormant virus in the Iridian genome. The virus spread like wildfire, causing widespread sterility and genetic deformities among the Iridian population. Within a generation, the once mighty Iridian Empire had crumbled, its people reduced to a handful of scattered refugees. They fled their dying worlds, seeking shelter among the other species of the galaxy. But few were willing to offer aid to the species that had brought such devastation and suffering. The Iridians became pariahs, shunned and despised by all who encountered them. As the years passed, David watched as humanity rose from the ashes, stronger and more united than ever before. They had paid a terrible price for their survival, but they had emerged from the crucible of war, tempered and unbreakable. And as he looked out across the stars, David knew that the sacrifices of Kyle and so many others had not been in vain. Humanity would endure, no matter the challenges that lay ahead. For they were the inheritors of the galaxy, the ones who had fought and bled and died for the right to shape their own destiny, and they would never again underestimate the strength and resilience of the human spirit. You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.